A lot of times, most people do not know that we have so many church fathers that set the foundation for Christianity. And a lot of them came out of Egypt. Now, if we ask most people where Egypt is, what do you hear? What's like the number one place you hear where Egypt is? The Middle East. Now, guess what? Biblically, historically, that's just a bunch of nonsense. The Middle East terminology didn't even come around until the early 1900s. That's when that started. Before the early 1900s, there was no Middle East. Historians either call it the ancient Near East, and then prior to that, especially when you get down to the times of Jesus, those systematic separation structures didn't even exist. They were called as provinces. Depending on who was the ruler at the time, he earned certain provinces, and that was that. So this whole term of Middle East is messed up. It's Africa, which consists of what we call the Middle East. Clearly. So they fooled us to feel like this part is just Africa, that part right there is not part of Africa. Now, we go into scriptures, okay? Let's say, for instance, we go into Isaiah 20, verse 3. And it says, and the Lord said, even as my servant Isaiah has gone naked, barefoot, 3 years, as a sign and a token against Egypt and Ethiopia, or Cush. So right here you see that Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, was actually walking from Egypt to Ethiopia. They was right next to each other. That's how close it was. But you don't hear Ethiopia being in the Middle East, do you? You just hear Egypt being in the Middle East. Also, anybody remember who Moses married? Ethiopian woman. Once again, Ethiopia, Egypt, always played a big part in the whole history and foundation of Africa. Now, what I don't want to do, especially for those that's using the King James, or for some people that's followed the Hebrew Israelites, for instance, is deal with false verses. And I want to identify 3 false verses. First is Jeremiah 14:2, which says, Judith mourneth he's black unto the ground. And you're going to hear Hebrew Israelites and some pro-black people tell you, you see, it tells you right here, Judah was black unto the ground. What color is the ground? Black, brown, like you. No, it's talking about Judah being in a state of mourning. That's plain and simple. That's what it's talking about. The next false black verse, Song of Solomon 1:5. And if we understand apocalyptic literature, these were not direct descriptions of what he actually looked like. Okay? It was prophetic. And when it was talking about the glow, it was talking about, a divine glow, not actual bronze, the color in it being bright to show its complexion. So we don't need those verses to identify our cultural African heritage in the scriptures. We don't need that at all. All right? Now, what we don't also need to do is to discredit Hebrew Israelites. Because a lot of times I get people that try to debate Hebrew Israelites, and they try to, going beyond what they're dealing with the law, they try to tell them we're not the Jews, or we're not the black people of the Bible. And at the end of the day, if anybody knows anything about Israel, I know some people may get mad at me about this, but Israel was just set up as Israel in 1948. Okay? That's when Israel was set up as a state. A lot of history that goes behind Israel is European history. It's not African history. Nobody can 100% say who are Jews, who are the Hebrew Israelites, but what we can say is, as close as possible, who most likely they look like. Part of the curses that came upon Israel was lack of identity. But historically, we can still see that the ancient Hebrew Israelites and their nearby neighbors all look like us. Same skin complexion. This is a picture of Thutmose III. He's possibly the pharaoh of biblical times. It's between him and some even say Ramses II. But look at his skin tone. That's what we want to pay attention to. Look at his skin tone. Once again, Ramses II. See his skin tone. All right. Now, Moses, everybody know the story of Moses, right? He was put into the water. He was taken out by who? The Pharaoh's daughter, right? He was taken out the Pharaoh's daughter, and he was to be what? Raised in the house of Pharaoh. So who was Moses supposed to be to the Pharaoh? The son. So if the Pharaoh looked like that, what is the son going to look like? And what y'all got to remember too is that the Egyptians were very big on ancestral relationships. If you just Google it right now and you look up, there was a lot of, especially when you're dealing with the pharaohs, when you're dealing with the elites, they believed in keeping their blood pure, that they committed incest. That's why now, even as archaeologists are finding out, that's why certain diseases are now being discovered in their bones. Even systematic forms in their height is also showing that same incest that was going on. So, knowing that he was supposed to be the son, and more than likely, in his eyes, this is the daughter with another family member, what Moses looked like. Now, when Moses left and he went to Midian at the well, what did the women say? Right, marked out the Egyptian. And they told the father, the Egyptian man, talking about Moses, helped us. So we don't need a verse that specifically says black. If we know how to piece together the history, understand what was going on during those time frames, look at archaeological evidence and facts, we can clearly see that he had a brown to dark brown skin complexion. That's what Moses looked like. Also, if we go into Genesis, when it talks about the Garden of Eden, it says the waters flowed through where? What was the African country named in that? Ethiopia, Cush. Okay? So Ethiopia starts in Genesis. When you go down to Genesis 15:18 with Abraham, when it talks about the land promise, it also says there that the land that was promised to Abraham also consisted of Ethiopia, as well as Egypt. Solomon's territory, when you go to 1 Kings 5:1, once again, it's listed African territory. My goal is not to make everybody in the Bible black. That's not what my goal is, because I don't believe everybody in the Bible is black. I believe most of the people in the Bible are black. I believe most of the authors in the Bible are black. I think when you go into the New Testament, it might have been maybe Luke, maybe Acts, maybe. Okay? Parts of Acts. But primarily, I do believe that most of the scriptures that we have was handed down to us through our African ancestors. And Christianity is more African than Islam. It's more African than a lot of things that we seem to be African. It's more African than that. It's more African than the camel. Christianity been in Africa longer than the camels been in Africa. So we've been under the guise that Christianity was brought from Europe into Africa, when actually it was vice versa. Actually, it was Africans that brought Christianity into Europe. So that whole false myth of colonialization of Christianity first being introduced to Africa by our colonizers is wrong. Now, there was a period of time where our colonizers did bring their version of Christianity back to Africa. But that is not when Christianity started. And that's where we got to, make a differentiation at. Christianity did not start with them rebringing a repackaged version of Christianity back. Constantine was 325 AD. Christianity was already existing in Africa way before that. Christianity existed in multiple territories before that, for the simple fact you have things like the Edict of Milan, which was 313, which shows you that Constantine had nothing to do with the establishment of Christianity, nor did Constantine have anything to do with the establishment of Christian doctrine. There's a lot of foolery that I hear from people that talk about the doctrines of Christianity being created by the white man. Now, a lot of times, this is what I get about people when they want to say what Jesus, Moses, Abraham, all the so-called prophetic people the Bible look like. They say they look more like Osama bin Laden. This is what he had to look like. Because this is the Middle East. No. This right here is subtle New World Orderism. And what I mean by that is, they have a doctrine where they believe that everything is to be neutral. They want to keep this color to be not too dark, not too light. Keep it in the middle. Make it pleasing for everybody. The white person with a tan can say, you know what, this looks beautiful to me. The black person like the light skins can say, this looks beautiful to me. Keep it in that neutral area. So a lot of times you hear people say that this is what he had to look like. This right here is coming out of Damatilia, Italy. And this is the 2nd century, and it's showing you with Jesus Christ and his disciples. This, amongst others, show him dark skin, darker than Osama bin Laden, woolly hair, okay, that does not portray this so-called medium image that they want to put. Now, this is the same medium image that they put on what they call video vixens. So you see Osama bin Laden, how he look. Now, this is the same image that they want propagated as being beautiful in our music, in our videos, in our models, right? They don't want them to look like that. Looking like this is too revolutionary. Looking like this is too black. You gotta have that light skin representation. There's nothing wrong. I love all my light skin people, so nobody look at me all wrong. It's just the fact that this is what they want our blackness to be too. So this is the blackness that they don't accept. They accept the blackness of the light skin as being beautiful, and that's the one that they want us to accept as being the most beautiful, but they don't want this images to be accepted as beautiful. And I'm a firm believer that black is just beautiful. Regardless of what skin color, how light or how dark, black period is just beautiful. But I'm not going to be under the impression that only the light-skinned part of being black is beautiful. In the New Testament, everybody familiar with the story of the Ethiopian eunuch with Philip? And what was interesting about in the New Testament with the Ethiopian eunuch?
He was reading the Old Testament.
Exactly. He was reading the Old Testament, specifically the book of what? The book of Isaiah. The same Isaiah that we just talked about that walked from Egypt to Ethiopia, right? So Isaiah was already walking through Egypt and Ethiopia, and now we get somebody that's thousands of years later reading the book of Isaiah from where? Ethiopia. So this is how Ethiopia was one of the first countries between Ethiopia and Egypt that embraced Christianity. So when this eunuch, according to Ethiopian history, he was one of the first ones to bring Christianity back to Ethiopia. And when he brought it back to Ethiopia, he wasn't bringing it back to a bunch of savages, like they want you to think. He brought it back to people that was actually keeping the Torah. They were already keeping the law. Even today, they have the tradition, what's called the Falasha Jews. Okay? And they tell you that their heritage goes all the way back to ancient Ethiopia. So, Ethiopia had this information. They had established doctrine. They were already debating Canon, along with Egypt, way before 325 AD with Constantine. It did not start with 325 AD. More blacks in the Bible for the New Testament. Simon of Cyrene. You go to Matthew 27:32. Does anybody know who Simon of Cyrene was? That's right. He was the man that carried the cross of Jesus, an African. How many times do you hear about Simon in any of our stories? In any of our children's stories? Do you hear an African carrying the cross of Jesus? They sort of seem to skip past that, don't they? It sort of seems like it goes right from Christ to the cross, and that's it. But in the midst of all that was an African that carried the cross of Christ. So once again, this is another figure that you can use when trying to show somebody Africans in the New Testament. And Cyrene will be considered today as what we call Libya. Now, we go into Acts chapter 2, verse 10, and Acts chapter 13, verse 1. You will also see that there was people from Cyrene, from Libya, who was also one of the first teachers of the gospel. They were teaching the gospel. Africans already in the New Testament teaching the gospel. So somebody saying they brought this here, it's impossible when our scriptures tell you differently. And this is what people want to say, well, that's just what your book says. Well, anytime somebody wants to get into that, this is what your book says situation, and this is what they're going to do. Well, this is what our records say, this is what our history says. And they're going to take it back to, for instance, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Always ask them, which book are you talking about? Because there's not just one Egyptian Book of the Dead. What you're more than likely referring to is the Papyrus of Ani, which became the most famous of the Egyptian books of the dead. But different pharaohs had Egyptian books of the dead. It wasn't limited to one. And as far as textual criticism is concerned, we have more textual evidence to the New Testament than any other ancient manuscript in the world. And they don't get that yet. We have more archaeological evidence than any other book in the world. So when you're using your Bible, don't be in fear that you're using a book to battle their book, and this is a book that was put together. This is archaeological evidence that you're using too. Anytime you use your Bible, you are using archaeological evidence with them. And don't let them feel like because you're using an English translation that it's not evidence. Remember, this English translation is coming from ancient manuscripts, translated, archaeological documents. So we're using ancient evidence when we're talking through our scriptures. And a lot of the times, things that said in the scriptures, from example, like 1,000 years ago when they said this person didn't exist or that person didn't exist, now they see that they do exist. Recently, if anybody's been paying attention, anybody see the new seal of Isaiah that just came up? So now they're starting to show you too that we have the seal of Isaiah. Before, they wasn't sure. Did they make this prophet up? Is he real? So what happened? During 1948, 1947, we had what was called the Qumran text. And what was found on that Qumran community? Once again, where was this at? Africa, Egypt, where they discovered these Qumran texts, and they also discovered what? A whole scroll of Isaiah. And when they found that scroll of Isaiah, that Dead Sea Scrolls, they said, you know what? This is going to prove that Christianity is false. Because we're going to take this, we're going to decipher, we're going to translate this, decipher this, and we're going to show everybody that Christianity is the most made-up religion on the face of the earth, because this is going to debunk it. And when they took this almost 2,000-year-old scroll and they translated it, they saw it was almost the same exact translation that we have in our midst today. It might have been a couple of periods or commas that was put in different places, but it was essentially the same exact Isaiah that we've been walking around with, found in Africa. Somebody else from the New Testament that a lot of people that I've been talking to definitely don't know is Mark. You know, we got the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. John Mark, or who I like to call African Mark, was from Libya. Okay? He came to Alexandria, Egypt about 48 AD, and that's when the church was founded after him. So, one of the oldest churches in the face of the earth was founded by Mark, who was an African from Libya. There was no white man going over there trying to teach the savages how to believe in Jesus. They went over there, and if you go into the Coptic church, they actually tell you that the main reason that Egypt and Ethiopia embraced Christ so quickly was because they were able to see through their own mystical stories, through their own fables and tales that was being told in their tradition, the true typology of who Christ was. So, for instance, when they saw the Ankh and the representation of the Ankh, and when it was shown to them about Jesus Christ being eternal life, like all of these things just started clicking with them. And the scriptures tell you that too if you go into Isaiah 19. It tells you how Ethiopia and Egypt would be the ones embracing Christianity, that they will be speaking in the same godly tongues. So Ethiopia and Egypt is very much so a part of our Christianity. And that is the Christianity that I embrace as far as my culture, not in the sense that I'm a Coptic or anything, but in the sense that first, when I need to understand and study something, I choose to go back to my ancestors. Why? Because they go back to their ancestors. And I'm going to get more into that into a minute. And for anybody that does any kind of textual criticism, so if you know Mark wasn't African, you also know that Matthew and Luke primarily took their gospel from Mark. Most textual criticism tells you that more than likely they had to go to Mark's original gospel in order to verify or to keep in line how their gospel was going to be documented. Now I want to deal with a couple of church fathers. And I think this is really important because these specific African church fathers, a lot of the times we either don't know about them, or when we do, we're shown. That's the church fathers right there. That's the images of the church fathers that we see most of the time. I was almost like smacked in the face one day when I was like, you know what? It's dope. I see these African church fathers. I'm about to go down Barnes & Nobles. I'm about to go pick up all these books from African church fathers. And when I'm looking at the books, I see all these blonde-haired dudes in the front cover. I'm like, hold up. This said Augustine was African. And I'm confused now. I'm like, hold up. Like, is this as rhetoric I'm seeing on this website, or was they really black? So then I'm going through these books. I'm going through the search engines. I'm doing all this research. And I'm saying, hold up. His mother was African. The father was African. He was born in Africa. But yet they got this European image as his representation. But guess what? A lot of good-hearted Christian people are going to tell you what? It don't matter what color he was. Yes, they do. It matters for somebody to spend multi-million dollars to propagate a certain image for a reason. Anybody remember the study they did like in the 60s or 70s, I believe, where they took the kids and they told them to go into the room and, you know, tell me what's the prettiest dolls in there? What dolls did they walk out saying the prettiest ones was? The white ones. So guess what? It mattered to those kids. The image, the picture of beauty that was projected to them mattered. So when you tell me it doesn't matter what color it is, it matters what color it is. Truth matters to me. And that's all we're dealing with. We're not trying to make everybody black, because not all the forefathers were black. A lot of them were from Rome. But a lot of the founding forefathers were African. And I'm going to briefly go over some of their names so you can write them down. And as I go over their name, I'm going to go over their contribution that they gave to the church, because a lot of the times, these are the things that people are going to engage us with and say, you see, they just made all this up. Athanasius of Alexandria, Egypt. Athanasius was an apologist, and he was also the first teacher of the hypostatic union, aka was named the Black Dwarf. Okay? Now, everybody doesn't know what the hypostatic union is? That's understanding the being fully God and fully man. That was Athanasius. So when you get your Kemetic dude, your Hotep dude trying to tell you, see, the white man I told you that he was God, and now y'all believe in it, this, that, and the third. No, it was actually a black man that told us that. Not a white man, it was a black man that told me that. Now you gotta go somewhere else and get your information. Because what you come up with now, I can historically show you that it was no white man that brought a black God image to me. Tertullian was born in Carthage, Tunisia. He was also an apologist. And he was also the first to coin the term Trinity. I got this so much from the Egyptian dudes. Yeah, you see, the original Trinity, Israel, right? You got Isis, Ra, and El. I'm like, hold up, bro, that's not even the same language. Like, where did you get that from? It's like they go off of certain words they want to see. You see, when you guys say amen, you're really seeing Amun. Amun is the Egyptian god. Bro, the same Semitic language that you're talking about in its original language does not equivalent to the language that you're talking about. If you go into the Metu Neter, the hieroglyphics, and you look at the hieroglyphic writings, and then you go to Hebrew, and if you understand that Hebrew has 3 root words, then you understand that these words are not even related. Not whatsoever. So just because something has the same phonetic sound doesn't mean it's related. That's like saying good morning and you mourning for your mom that passed away means the same thing. They both sound the same. They don't mean the same thing. And a lot of times that's a little trick that they try to do when they're trying to break down words to you. Even when they say Isis, Ra, and El for Israel. Well, for one, if you really was a Kemetic dude or an Egyptian studier, you know that her name wasn't even Isis, it was Set. So the I situation is done with. It should have been an A. But we're not going to go that deep. Origin. Born in Alexandria, Egypt, he was the father of systematic theology. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know when the last time I saw a systematic theology written by a black person. I got Wayne Grudem's, was it Murkoff, a couple other ones. But they're not teaching you that the same systematic theology was already being broken down by African forefathers. Why? I mean, these are questions that we got to ask ourselves. Why? Augustine of Hippo. Now, he shaped the Western Christianity tradition. And I want to make a side note, especially when dealing with people like Augustine of Hippo, is that just because I'm saying that they're black, and they are black, doesn't mean that they were all for black people, because you also had black house Negroes back then too. Okay, just like we do today. So you also had ones that, because they felt like they were educated in Rome, they knew Plato, they studied Socrates, they studied all the different philosophical texts, that they were the ones to be propagated amongst the ones of the main Africans. That's why you'll hear certain forefathers mentioned more instead of the ones that actually spoke just their native tongues. See, most of the forefathers we hear about are the ones that spoke multiple languages. They spoke their own home language as well as they spoke Romans language. We also have Anthony the Great of Egypt. He was known as the father of all monks. He's known for his high asceticism, and he also is behind the order of the St. Anthony that's in Ethiopia today, that was established in 370. So being a monk didn't even start with the Europeans. Being a monk started with the Africans. St. Anthony started being a monk, and he established what was called the Ethiopian Chivalric Order in Ethiopia. And that's also where people try to talk like the Knights Templar, or like the first chivalric order after Christianity. They're actually not. It was actually Ethiopians and Egyptians that actually had the first chivalric orders that represented Christianity. Abba Shinoti of Egypt. Now, I just got hip to him from Vince Bansu. He was known for his high asceticism, and he was also documented monasticism before the Rule of Benedict. If anybody's familiar with the Rule of Benedict, that's like the #1 monastic book that's used amongst church fathers today. Now, when we get to like the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, we have things like the Coptic cross. Okay, the Coptic cross is what I wear. Now, to the Ethiopians, this cross doesn't represent a symbol of death, I should say, as most people say the Roman cross represented. Now, I have nothing against the Roman cross at all. But to them, this wasn't just a stake of execution. To them, they actually entwined certain things into their meaning for their cross. One is, if you look at it real deep, within the symbolism, you can also see what they have as the Ark of the Covenant. Because to this day, they believe the Ark of the Covenant is there. Also, the intertwining that you see going on here, it represents Ethiopia's firm stance on Jesus Christ being fully God, fully man, intertwined in one. So, you know, they have a lot of theological information that's going through a lot of their symbolic teachings as far as the cross and different symbols that they represent. And if you go into Ethiopia, even with their churches, they got inside of the ground, you actually see a lot of those symbols also. They also have what's called the Book of Enoch. Now, there's a lot of debate on the canonization of Enoch, and I don't believe the version that we have today is full canon, and it should be in the canon. But you did have people like Tertullian that fought for it to be in canon. But I do believe through studying that there is relevant information that's inside of those texts that we could still use today culturally, as well as certain things that deals with certain things touching the Bible. For instance, the book of Jude and 1 Peter quote Enoch. If you're not familiar with that, go to Genesis 6. It talks about the giants. The giants is elaborated in Enoch, the Nephilim. They also have what's called the Adeptic Commentary. These are commentaries that's like so rare we're not going to see, but these are things that we should be trying to get our hands on, because these are the commentary texts that our ancestors are using. And they also have a hermeneutic approach that's a little bit different than a lot of Westerners. And this can be looked up in the Ethiopian reading of the Bible by Constantine. He's actually a Korean dude that's breaking down how the Ethiopian church deciphers the Bible. Our current scholarship. So I'm going to break down two people real quick. One is Kwame Bediako. And what he's doing right now, he's recognizing the value of indigenous religions and beliefs, and how these are useful to pointing people to the gospel. And then we have Victor Exigbo. He's also breaking down how Jesus is the revealer of divinity and humanity, through whom African Christians can assess and redirect the knowledge of God and humanity that they gain from African indigenous religions and Western forms of Christianity. Jesus Without Borders, Christology in the Majority World, and that's by Victor Exigbo. And I'm gonna end with this, and I got some sources for you. I'm gonna name these sources real quick before as I end. You have Free at Last by Carl Ellis. You have How Africa Shaped the Christian Mind by Thomas Oden. You have The African Memory of Mark, which is also by Thomas Oden. You have the Church Fathers Works by Christopher Hall. You have the Complete Anti-Nicene Church Fathers. And this is like a real dope set, but it's like multiple volumes. You can get like a cheap version if you want it digital. Then you also have what's called the Synaxarium of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church by Wallace Budge. You can get that for free online. It's basically a book about the saints, the Ethiopian saints. And Urban Apologetics by Christopher Brooks. And also look out for Pastor Eric Mason's new book coming out on a woke church. And I'm going to close with this. And you know, we need to create a culture around Christianity, and we need to sacrifice of apologetics, which is having a love for the people and self-sacrifice. So a lot of the times, we get so stuck in Christianity with the personal aspect of salvation that we forget it goes beyond us. So we want to have our personal devotional time. We want to sit down and pray. We want to sit down and meditate. That's all good. We're supposed to be doing all of that. But we also are supposed to know how to defend the faith. Okay? We also need to know our history so we can have a better engagement with our brothers and sisters as we're defending the faith and engaging these different urban religions in our community. So that would mean that personal prayer time that you have, you may need to split that up into different segments or add something else onto it so that you can get some studying to learn. So a sacrifice on your part in order so that you can help spread the gospel to somebody else. And I'm going to end with this last part. Some of y'all will be mad at me, but it is what it is. And I'm going to say this. Don't become a reformed house Negro. Okay? And I'm going to break down what house Negro meant according to the Malcolm X as he gave the speech at Michigan State University, January 1963. He says, a house Negro usually lived close to his master. He dressed like his master. He wore his master's secondhand clothes. He ate the food that his master left on the table. And he lived in his master's house, probably in the basement or in the attic, but he still lived in his master's house. When the master was sick, he said, we sick. When the master's house burned down, he said, our house burned down. And that's what I'm seeing right now amongst a lot of Reformed people, is that they've adopted a 16th century only approach to Christianity. There is nothing wrong with the fundamental doctrines of the Reformed faith at all. But they have a hard time sometimes separating their doctrine and the ethics that they live by. Right. Puritans had slaves. So I'm not going to be bigging up John Owen every day. I'm just not. He was a slave owner. Period. Martin Luther didn't even believe in the full canonization of Scripture. He didn't even believe the book of James should be in there. That was Jesus' brother. Calvin. Luther was also anti-Semitic. Calvin did some miserable things. So we can't spend so much time bigging up a cultural aspect of Reformed theology, even though, like I said, there's a lot of truth there, there's a lot of truths I believe and I abide by. But as a culture, we have to step back and say, you know what? Where did they get these things from? And you'll see, it all came out of Africa. They were all studying the African forefathers. And don't get mad because now we're trying to put a face onto the true forefathers, put a face onto the true Christian doctrine. Y'all, they had a face on it for so long. Now they're becoming upset because guess what? I know some pastors don't want to hear this, but some pastors are stopped from teaching truth, okay, because of being no longer a pastor no more. Some pastors belong to churches where if they change any way whatsoever how they think, they won't be a pastor no more. Some pastors are scared to engage in justice and racial issues because they don't want to be looked at different. So that's why it's real important that we study and we build with our pastors, we build with our leaders, and we try to engage them on all levels. I think he gave me the warning, so now I'm going to answer some questions. Anybody has.